Hi guys, welcome. So I want to talk a little bit today about UK knife law and something that's just happened to me. I've had a visit from the police, and I'll talk a little bit about that and how that might affect some other people, and then we'll go into some other changes and nuances to UK knife law that you may or may not have heard about, and some of these will effectively criminalize people that may not feel that they're doing anything wrong at all. So it's important, you guys need to have a look at this. Bear in mind, I'm not a solicitor, but even if we did have a solicitor on here, some of this is so complex and as yet to be decided in UK courts. No one's actually made specific rulings on some of these things, and so even a solicitor is going to say, well, I'll err on the side of caution, but there's no real answer to some of these questions. So I'll get started on why I got a visit from the police a bit unexpectedly. This was a couple of weeks ago, late Sunday evening. The police have obviously got so much crime to solve that they had someone free to come round and give me some grief. Obviously they've got plenty of funding and very low crime rates in this area. So the guy came round and he said, I need to come in and speak to you. It's very important. He looked a bit stern. So I thought, well, this is pretty unusual. Maybe I've witnessed something that I hadn't realised or whatever. Invited him in and he said, you've attempted to import something that's, a dangerous article that's illegal. And, I'm here to hear about it and hear your side of the story. And he said, it's been seized by customs at UK border, and do you know anything about it? So sure enough, of course, I do know something about it. It was a knife from Concept Knives that they had sent over. Funny enough, I'd won it in a competition on Instagram. First thing I've ever won, I think, in a competition. And it's a knife with a flipper tab. So it's manual opening knife, no springs, not assisted. It does have a flipper tab on the tang, a bit like one of these. So if you guys haven't seen a flipper tab before, that's this part here, which is simply part of the tang, which allows you to deploy the blade like so, and then it's just a standard locking knife. So it replicates this one in form and function. That's a Mazarin, but the concept in question was exactly the same as that. So a locking knife, manual opening. We all know, of course, with locking knives that you need an excuse to be walking around in public with them, but basically you can own them at home if you've got an excuse, like you use them for work, which I do. In fact, my work even bought me a CRKT M16, which is also a flipper knife. That was purchased in the UK. And these type of knives are currently for sale at several distributors in the UK. So as far as I'm aware, no issue at all. I was aware that there'd been some changes made to the, the knife law, which fell under the Switchblade type regulation, the flick knife regulations, and we'll get into that in a second. So the policeman basically tells me about this, and I say, sure thing. I've got several of these knives. I collect knives, I review knives, have done for years. And he said, oh, okay. So I actually pulled out a couple of flipper knives that I had sat on the side. I said, I've reviewed these have been purchased in the UK. As far as I can tell from the law, they don't fall foul of it. They're not spring assisted or anything like that. Oh, okay, he said, in your opinion, he said, are you saying that UK customs are incompetent and that they've got this wrong? And I said, yes, absolutely, I am saying that, which he sort of was taken aback a bit. I think he was expecting me to agree with him and saying, well, no, UK customs could never get anything wrong. They're on the money with everything. Look, we all know in these communities, the knife community, that there's an unofficial policy with UK customs to basically confiscate every single bladed article pretty much that comes through and that they get eyes on, and then they basically bestow the responsibility on the guy at the receiving end to kind of prove that he should have that thing. And they really don't have a damn clue which knives that you can and can't have. They just seize everything. They've got no idea. Half of them are on you know, pretty rubbish pay. They're not particularly well trained, and they're just guys that are sitting there rooting through all your stuff and seeing what you can and can't have. And we've already got the complexity that is the zombie knife rules, you know, so you've got guys sat there going, oh, is that the type of green that they might use on some zombie adverts? Would we consider those marking splashes? Is that a radioactive symbol? You know, like ridiculous laws that we've got there, which basically regulate how a blade looks rather than anything specific about it in form and function. It's like banned if it is painted in a certain colour, which is absolutely insane. Anyway, I digress. So the policeman then, you know, informs me, well, I'm going to have a word with your FEO, which is a firearms enforcement officer, because obviously because of my job and stuff, I regularly work with firearms. So that then has an impact on me, you know, that's got a personal impact, that as soon as firearms hear about things, they get very upset with you, because they've got an unofficial policy to basically take as many firearms off of legitimate owners as they possibly can. All this comes from government, you know, from top down, and it's not anything that you can find written anywhere, but if you talk to the right people, they will confirm, yeah, you know, that's what we've been told in our offices is our job is to kind of remove these things from the streets, even though they are legally held things that people are perfectly able to have. So it's then I know that that's going to create me some issues. So the guy's already said it's been recorded, you know, with a crime number. So it's already become a crime, even though, you know, I haven't done anything illegal. And I said, you know, what makes this illegal? And he said, well, it's all to do with what you are going to use the thing for. And I said, well, that's like the thought police. You know, what are we talking about here? That I get what he's saying, that if I was going to buy that type of knife and then walk around in public brandishing it, or have no good reason to be walking around with it, sure, it would become an illegal object. But that's a bit like saying, if I was going to buy a car and my idea with that car was to drive it uninsured and untaxed without a driving license and drunk and crash it into someone, then that car would be a problem. Well, yes, it would, but as far as I'm aware in this country, the police aren't here to kind of pull you in for questioning on things that they think could happen one day with objects that are at the moment completely legal to have. So a bizarre way of looking at it. And then when he left, I started looking a bit into the law surrounding this, and the changes to the flick knife stroke switchblade laws in this country are at best a grey area, you know. So currently there are flipper knives and various different locking knives that can have the blade deployed one-handed on sale in the UK, and I actually brought that up with the police as well and said, you know, these type of knives are currently on sale, you know, why aren't you visiting the people that are selling them? They've got hundreds of them. Why are you visiting me and not them? Because obviously a guy that's selling hundreds is a bit more worrying than someone that's expecting to do, you know, to receive one. And he said, oh, well, they're not breaking the law. I think it's only illegal if you buy them. It's not illegal to sell them, which again is a bizarre thing to say, and I think just based on complete incompetence and not understanding what he's talking about, because that is not correct at all. You know, if it's an illegal and dangerous object, like if it was a knuckle duster, for example, which are banned from personal ownership, and you know, if you were selling 100 knuckle dusters, you would be in a lot more trouble than a guy that just had one randomly sat in the cupboard that he'd had for years or whatever. So that is a strange way of looking at it from that policeman's perspective. Anyway, we're talking about flippers. So you could interpret the current switchblade stroke flick knife law, because they changed it. It used to have something along the lines of, you know, a button which helps the blade to spring out or whatever. It was, don't quote me verbatim, but it was around that sort of issue. Now they've changed it. So if we look up on the .gov website, selling, buying, carrying knives, it does actually describe what they refer to as a flick knife, and they also list gravity knife switchblade or automatic knife in the description. And that used to be a knife where the blade opens automatically or is released from the handle by pressing a button. But they've now updated that to by pressing a button or something else on the knife. So although we clearly know that they're talking about a switchblade, which is, you know, a spring assisted device that basically you press something on the knife and it flicks the blade out, that could now be open to interpretation because they've thrown gravity in there as well. And for example, with this, you know, if I deploy with that tang on the back and that drops down, one could argue that is deployed with a device on the knife and it's using gravity to deploy. Now that's a strange one in itself because there are things like thumb studs on knives, so you know, you could use that. And this is a non-locking knife, so if I flick this out hard enough and flick those thumb studs, this is the excellent twisted assisted Junzi, like so. We've deployed the blade with gravity. I mean, I've put some inertia into it there and I've used a thumb stud. Now there have been people that are seeking to get clarification on some of this stuff, especially people in the industry that are selling knives in the UK. And the only bit of clarification I think came from the Home Office, where a lady there basically said, well, I would agree, you know, a thumb stud opening is okay. And when pressed on the matter, she said it's more to do with the speed of the blade opening than anything else. Which, as we've just seen, you can open a knife very fast with a thumb stud. Which I've got a thumb stud on this one, which is a little DPX. You know, that deploys like so. And the DPX can also be deployed from the pocket because you can basically snag that bottle opener on the blade, snag it on the pocket, and it deploys like so. So there's all kinds of things that are now confusing because what about a Spyderco? I've heard people say, well, they said the thumb stud was okay, so surely that's okay because that's a thumb hole. But we don't have any legal clarification on that. So it's entirely possible that you could, you know, certainly get these knives seized at customs because they're just reading that as a, you know, a cross between a switchblade, a gravity knife, and that being something that can be opened rapidly with depression of something on the knife. It's such a grey area, the wording, that you could basically infer that pretty much any knife in the UK could fall under that issue. And I mean, here we have a Concept knives, which is actually a double detent, so it doesn't even lock, but it has a flipper tab here. So, you know, is that now illegal because it can be flipped open? Could that be seized at customs even though there's no locking mechanism on it whatsoever? The blade opens very quickly, which the Home Office have said that, you know, that they take some sort of issue with a blade that opens quickly. Absolutely bizarre. Now, when the FEO came and spoke to me, he had obviously gone away and done a bit of looking at and studying in this area, and he then immediately said, well, actually started off by saying it depends what your intention is with the knife. Which again, we're getting into this sort of thought police area of, and I mean, what kind of idiot would I be if I said, well, my intention was to take it around in public without any reason and wave it about in the air? I would have to be pretty stupid, and pretty much any of these knives can be a problem if you take them into the wrong place, like a school or a courthouse and, you know, various other places that are knife free by law. So I don't really understand what he's getting at. I mean, that's a bit like, say, you know, ban everyone from owning a Swiss Army knife because they might be thinking of, you know, taking it into a courthouse. Well, I thought the police were there to kind of deal with the law getting broken, not to kind of question people and see if they ever felt like possibly breaking the law at some point in the distant future, and then, you know, take action based on that, it seems pretty dystopian and rather hard to police, given the fact that UK law doesn't really take into account, you know, bringing people to justice based on what might be in their minds or not. I guess you could argue conspiracy, but, you know, like I say, you would have to actually sit down in an interview and say, yeah, I bought this thing in order to do something awful with, and, you know, if that's the case, you obviously deserve everything you get if you really did do that. But what kind of idiot criminal would sit there and say, yeah, I'm buying a knife because I want to go and do a criminal act with it? No one's going to admit that. It's a bit like, you know, asking people if they're terrorists at the airport. I don't think anyone would answer yes if they got asked that question, especially not if you're a terrorist. So we have a lot of confusion there. I've, you know, spoken to a solicitor that's well versed in this stuff. He just advised me I had nothing to worry about. You know, they were clutching at straws, but he couldn't really give me a definitive answer on any of this, because he basically said the only options we have is for every knife I had that had a different mechanism on it, I could basically seek clarification in court. So it'd cost me money. I'd have to, you know, get my solicitor involved. We'd go to court, and you can actually ask a court to, you know, give you a ruling on an item. So I would submit an item, for example, say something with a thumb stud or something with a flipper. And the best we could hope for is that the court would make a ruling on that specific knife. And even worse than that, it would be unlikely that they would make a ruling that covered, say, all flipper knives. Their ruling would more than likely be that this Mazarin particular model knife, you know, was considered okay or not okay, as the case may be, and you would have a ruling on your specific knife. So if you're like me and you've got like 50 of these things, then that's going to be a very timely and non-cost effective solution. It's basically unworkable, and that's kind of, I'm getting the feeling, what they're aiming for with this is just to make it incredibly difficult for people to, you know, bring any of these things into the country. I did hear from someone in the business that they were importing Benchmades, and they were, you know, getting picked up by customs and saying, oh, these are gravity knives because they can be deployed. They were bug out, you know, Benchmade bug outs. And so the guy ordering them at this end actually asked Benchmade to tighten up all the pivot points. So basically, if you tighten these pivots either side, that makes this thing very, very stiff to open and close. And then when customs got hold of them, they couldn't sort of deploy them one-handed and flick them out, and they said, oh, well, they're fine, and they sent them on, which just goes to show how much those guys know. You know, it's funny, it happens in firearms as well, that the people that police a lot of this stuff and the people that are making laws on a lot of this stuff are actually the people that know the least amount about this stuff, because that's a pivot, you can just open it back up again when you get it home. That shouldn't dictate as to whether something is illegal or illegal based on how tight a pivot is done up. But that's what we're dealing with, guys. So I wanted to heads you up on that. You know, if you're someone that's ordering stuff from abroad or bringing it back, be aware that that could be a problem. I'm going to approach customs and try and get them to release the article, being as the FEO that came to visit me has deemed it now. He doesn't believe it is an illegal thing, and he said he's absolutely fine with it and he understands, no problem at all. But that still leaves me without a knife and having to kind of wrestle it back off customs, which may or may not happen. And this brings me to the second part of UK knife law issues, which is kind of under the radar, a court ruling that did some changes to the EDC laws here in the UK. So currently in the UK, EDC knife law stipulates that a blade has to be below 3 inches, and that at one point was below 3 inches of cutting edge. That was how the law was defined, and it must be non-locking. So you had knives like this Boca XS, which is non-locking. You can see it's a slip joint, nothing to lock, it just stiffly holds into place like a Swiss Army knife. And then that blade there, as we can see, if I grab my ruler. The cutting edge is below 3 inches because the cutting edge starts here, but the overall blade length is just above 3 inches. You can see the tip there just going above 3 inches. So at one point that was perfectly legal to carry in the UK, and you didn't need an excuse for carrying it. So these type of knives, you don't need an excuse. They're just everyday carry. You can have them just like a Swiss Army knife, you know, it's a pen knife basically. But there was a recent judgment made in a court case that dictated that actually that 3-inch blade length encompassed the entirety of the blade, and it did not take into account just the cutting edge. So something like this bokeh would then be deemed a longer than 3-inch blade, despite the fact you've got about, you know, half an inch or more of that has no sharpness on it at all. So we're then looking at, you know, these sort of smaller pen knives, or these type of pen knives. Got a nice Swiss Army knife there, which if we measure that, we can see the whole blade is well below 3 inches. But I wonder how far they take that measurement, because if we look at this Junzi, you know, that has a nice big choil there. So normally the measurement would have been taken from, say, back here for the cutting edge, but now it's coming further forward. But do you take it from this midsection here, or do you measure from back here where the handle starts to curve back? Because if we do that, then you could in theory be just over 3, you know, that's right at the back end of the blade there. Or do you look inside there and say, well, actually that piece of blade is going even further in, and then you're taking a measurement based on that amount, you know, how far that sits back in there. So again, that's completely unclear. In this particular court case, they just defined it as the entire blade length, and from what I can understand, they measured it from the handle. But that leaves us in a case of complete unknowing, really, because they could in the next court case decide that they're going to measure just the entire tang of the blade, and they could even take the blade out of the handle and sort of measure the whole piece of metal and deem it like that. But certainly at the moment it looks like these type of knives, if you've got an older bokeh excess, then that has now become illegal unless you've got a good reason to carry it. So it's basically would be considered the same as carrying like a lock knife, you know, around. You would need a good reason, like a work reason. And good reason doesn't extend to, oh, but I had it at work and now I'm walking home and I'm on my way home and I stopped inside the pub for a drink. You know, travelling to and from work, good reason, within limits, because if you travel to and from work and you're hanging around in a kid's playground for half an hour and you've got a great big knife on you that you use for work, that's going to be a problem. You know, you should travel straight to work, straight back from work, keep the knife hidden in a work bag, folded up. You know, if you're carrying a knife around strapped to your waist in a scabbard or whatever, trying to look cool and walking through town back from work, you're going to have some grief. They're going to stop you, and you could get into a lot of trouble with that, because they're going to say, well, you're walking in a busy town, why are you strapped? You know, like, why don't you have it in your work bag? So all problems, none of this stuff's going to get any better, because as usual in this country, you know, it's much easier for politicians and lawmakers to ban inanimate objects than it is to actually deal with the nuanced and complex reasons that knife crime is occurring, which is down to poverty, lack of education, you know, the removal of services in some of the communities that are the most poverty stricken. So if you remove mental health services and you remove community projects for young children, then don't be surprised when people start hanging around on street corners and forming their own communities, i.e. gangs, and that leads to nothing good. if the kids have got nothing to do, then funnily enough, they don't tend to do anything really good. So we can see a direct correlation between things like knife crime and violence in general and the defunding of community projects and stuff by the government, which has probably gone on for the last 10 years, just the same as they've defunded the NHS and various other things. And instead of saying, yeah, you know, we've defunded stuff and we're going to pump more money into it and actually solving the root cause, what instead they'll say is knife crime is because knives are bad and we should ban all knives, despite the fact that knives are one of the most useful tools on the planet and have been, you know, used for hundreds and hundreds of years by people to do various different jobs and to help us eat and all kinds of stuff. We all use knives every day. Knives are not evil. Knives are a perfectly good and functional tool. The issue is the people that are wielding them. And we've done the same with firearms in this country. You know, they banned firearms instead of dealing with the root causes of people that were having issues, you know, and going out and doing bad things with firearms. Why are they doing that? What's failing in our system that's promoting people having psychopathic episodes and going out and shooting people? Well, firstly, it doesn't help that we've totally defunded the mental health care services in this country, and those people are basically left to wander around the streets and are not being properly looked at. So there we go, rant over with. Beware, guys. You know, I just wanted to head you up on these issues. If you are a knife collector, owner, user, whatever, be very, very wary. If you're importing them, be wary that they're probably going to get seized and you're going to get some grief. Thanks for watching. I hope that was, you know, of interest to everyone. Sorry, it was a bit of a moody sort of subject matter, a bit negative, but it's important to get the information out there. Take care. I'll see you all soon. Have a good one.